everyone, this is Callimara here, and no, it's not calamari. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new to the pond, go ahead and take a dive. You might like it here. So, today's topic, as you might have seen from the title and thumbnail, might be a bit of a throwback to some of my subscribers from my earlier days on YouTube. For context, I have quite a history with Yandere Simulator and its developer, since I basically built my channel through my Yandere Simulator rewrite and redesign series, where I would take the issues I had with the game's mechanics, characters, and stories and channel it into something more creative and productive. The series is still up in case you wanted to see it, but you might notice that it ended rather abruptly, and that's because at that point I'd become very familiar with the red flags and MO that the dev exhibited and implemented in his game, and it just felt viscerally wrong for me to associate with and create content for it, even to criticize it. Throughout these videos, I like to think that I tried my best to discourage people from supporting the game and its developer through my criticisms and bringing exposure to the various misdeeds and glaring red flags that the developer exhibited. Now, because of this history, I feel obligated to bring everything I have learned and pieced together recently to bring attention to it, so that at the very least, you will be armed with information and can carry your own opinions on the situation. But it is also very important that this information gets out there so that it reaches as many people as possible. As is the norm on YouTube recently, this story is a case of grooming and sexual exploitation of a minor by someone with a massive platform who possesses a pattern of abusive behavior that his supporters normalized for years. So trigger warning on that. Only proceed if you feel that you are in a position to do so. I'm sure for many people who have any passing knowledge of YandereDev, let alone following him like I have, what happened was not in the slightest bit surprising. In fact, for me personally, it was an eventuality. A ticking time bomb that was just a matter of when. YandereDev is someone who has direct access to minors, with a fan base composed largely of them and a pattern of degenerate behavior and mindset. Just a recipe for disaster. He has been long called out for his behavior and degenerative views on subjects such as the age of consent and relationships, actions and takes that his supporters and people in his circle excused for years, and as a result, he has always managed to bounce back from it. But things are different now, because some of his major supporters who have supported him through all his controversies are finally walking out and disavowing him. As of writing the script, here is a list of all the contributors to Yandere Simulator that have publicly disavowed and walked out of the project, including the voice actors of major characters like Michaela Laws, the voice of Yandere-chan herself. And I'm sure more will follow. I believe this is the final blow we needed to take away YandereDev's platform, because he has proven time and time again that he does not deserve it. I personally find it galling that it took this long for them to do this, but better late than never, I guess. From this point on, I'd like to disclose that everything I say in this video is an allegation. We do not know for sure the truth of the situation, and these are my speculations based on information that was made publicly available by Ali McC and the victim themselves, who originally worked with Ali McC to make the video. So, over the course of the summer of this year in 2023, YandereDev had allegedly groomed and sexually exploited a minor who will be referred to as Jane. Even though their username has been made public, I still want to respect their wishes in keeping their identity anonymous, because it's actually one of the few decisions that they got to make on their own without any coercion. Jane was less than half of YandereDev's age, and he would contact them through private Discord voice calls and Snapchat messages under the name Cosplay Fan. And while the voice calls are undeniably him, the identity of the Snapchat account owner is much shakier, which, if the messages sent there are to be believed, was intentional. I personally believe that this was YandereDev due to the conversations regarding Ali's video where YandereDev was telling Jane how they should proceed with retracting their story and to stop Ali from making the video public, because these exact phrases and words appear in both Jane's statement retraction, including all 3 iterations where it was posted on r/Yandere Simulator and r/Osana, and YandereDev's WordPress apology, which we will be dissecting further into the video. I actually did a 3-hour-long live stream with Malu Malware about this, so if you want to see us break down the video in great detail and piece our findings together, go check it out. We also got to speak directly with Ali regarding her video because while I appreciate Ali for bringing this situation to light, I do believe they could have handled things much better with Jane, and due diligence was certainly neglected when it came to protecting their safety. I understand that they needed to gather evidence against YandereDev, but I question the wisdom and morality of using said victim as bait to get them. But this video is not about Ali, so let's focus on YandereDev. Before I get into anything else, I think it's important to discuss the victim retractions, as this is the victim's story. They have posted their statements on the r/Osana subreddit, where it was allegedly deleted, and only remains live in the r/Yandere Simulator subreddit, where those of you who are familiar with YandereDev might be aware everything is heavily moderated by Alex himself. In both statements, the victim denies that they were ever threatened, harmed, or groomed by YandereDev, and that the entire situation was taken completely out of context and blown out of proportion, while at the same time stating that they have been threatened with legal action for the voice calls that they recorded without his knowledge. So, which is it? Were you threatened or were you never threatened? But the reason I mention this is because while I will always side with the victim and respect their wishes, there is a blatant and admitted coercion through emotional manipulation and legal threat that not only further prove the allegations of grooming, but also nullifies their consent. Now, before you raise your pitchforks at me, let me explain. As a healthcare worker, we had to learn a lot about consent and the law surrounding consent because it's a very big component in healthcare. And common law states that when coercion is present, it renders the act of consenting null and void. In order for consent to be given, the person must be fully informed on the consequences of their decision, have mental competency, and most importantly, do so voluntarily. According to the NHS, this means that the decision to either consent or not to consent must be made by the person and must not be influenced by pressure from staff, friends, or family. Based on the statements made by Jane, even without taking the Snapchat messages, which are just outright damning, into consideration, there is strong evidence of the victim being coerced, if not forced, by legal threat into silence to act against their best interests and prioritize YandereDevs, and that is why I am proceeding with this video. He literally told Jane to say, "I lied, none of it was real. I asked my friend to use a YandereDev AI voice changer. That is not actually his voice. Please don't actually release any video. The evidence is all fake." By utilizing secrecy and silence, 2 of the most commonly used tactics by groomers, YandereDev only further to cement himself as one, in my perspective. He wants to silence the victim so that he can continue to control the narrative. And it's so important that we don't let him twist the truth. And the only way to do that is to expose his lies by comparing them with the facts that are present. So I implore you to watch Ali's video, which is linked in my description, to witness these exchanges for yourself and form your own opinions. Previously, the victim had taken the video down on a live stream with Cameron F305, a very staunch supporter of YandereDev, who I have no doubt will continue supporting the man until the sun goes cold. But the video has since been re-uploaded by another channel. In this live stream, the victim claimed that the reason they were recording these clips in the first place was because, and I paraphrase here, YandereDev says the silliest clippable things and wanted to share such jokes with their friends. But we'll get into why I think that's not entirely the truth either. Now, if the victim is watching this, then I ask you, please keep watching, because I have included this part specifically for you and for anyone else who may be experiencing or have gone through grooming. I have seen so many misinformed people focusing their blame on the victim for either defending YandereDev or for being in that situation in the first place. They see that Jane's behavior is inconsistent, one moment gathering evidence to expose YandereDev with Ali and the next desperately trying to defend him. Some people took the retraction to mean that nothing happened at all, and the evidence that was gathered beforehand is therefore moot. But just know that this is exactly what Alex or YandereDev intended to happen when he silenced you and released his statements. He wanted people to think that this was all your fault as opposed to him, the responsible adult in the situation who had infinitely more power than you ever did in that relationship. And the behavior that the victim is showing now is textbook behavior for grooming victims. So to stop further misinformation and twisting of the truth, I'd like to share with you all an article to inform you more on the experience of a grooming victim and what happens to their mindset when they are groomed. You can find the link to this article in the description, and I highly suggest you read it in full for yourself. This article is written by Ulich and Oak from Massey University in New Zealand. Though its main purpose is to find the relationship between grooming and the development of Stockholm Syndrome, both in the victim and the practitioner handling the victim, it has some excellent discussion around the process of grooming and the tactics often used by groomers to make their victims reluctant to disclose their experiences or outright protect their groomers. I also want to emphasize the importance of not conflating the term pedophile and S-offender. As mentioned in the article, the term pedophile is a specific clinical diagnosis, and most child S offenders engage in grooming, not just. It further goes on to say the conflation of with S offenders may prevent the offender recognizing and taking responsibility for their grooming behaviors. Which makes sense, because then the offender can simply use the defense that they're not a never actually address their grooming behavior. So please keep this in mind moving forward. Do not give these people any kind of wiggle room. Of course, that isn't to say whether or not YandereDev is a because at the end of the day, I'm not a licensed psychiatrist who can give him an official diagnosis, and because I know the man will refuse to set foot in a doctor's office anyway, so come to your own conclusions on that. Let's move on and define what grooming is, because it is not what YandereDev thinks it is, as we can see in the Snapchat message. According to this article as cited from Craven et al. In 2006, grooming is a process by which a person prepares a child, significant adults, and the environment for the abuse of a child. Specific goals involve gaining access to the child, gaining the child's compliance, and maintaining the child's secrecy to avoid disclosure. It is not, "Mwahaha, I will ensure that I F this girl when she turns 18, mwahaha." YandereDev, Alex. Of course, this may differ from other valid definitions of grooming based on the source, but for this video, this is the definition we will be using. YandereDev, being a well-known public figure with his own community, already has a prepared environment that places him in a position of trust where victims are unlikely to be believed. And knowing the demographic of people who genuinely like this game, YandereDev also has access to potential victims who would do anything for him because of his status and renown. The last requirement he needed to fulfill this definition to a T was maintaining the child's secrecy to avoid disclosure, which he has now also completed. Achievement unlocked! True groomer! Hence why I also said earlier that this feels like a ticking time bomb that was just waiting to explode. He already had the components, it was just a matter of when. With that in mind, let's talk about the process of grooming. Craven et al.'s 2006 literature review identified 3 types of actual grooming. Self-grooming, grooming the environment, which we touched on before, and grooming the child. What do you know, YandereDev actually does all 3. First, self-grooming. According to the article, this involves the justification or denial of the offending behavior as a precursor to the move from thinking about the act to being motivated to abuse. An example of this would be perhaps someone saying, "Oh, I was just joking around. I didn't actually intend what I said to be any type of romantic or sexual interest." Where does that sound familiar? It can be affected by the response of both the wider community and the child, both of which, in YandereDev's case, we know are very receptive and open to his unhinged ideals. In self-grooming, the perpetrator adopts the cognitive distortion used by the victims themselves to minimize the harm or to justify behavior. We see both of this in his WordPress apology and Discord server apology. This next part is just damning to YandereDev and his pattern of behavior. Children are regarded as S-objects rather than human beings, or there is a sense of entitlement on the part of the abuser, or the behavior is excused by the belief system, "We live in a dangerous world," or it is excused by, in quotes, "uncontrollable urges." To groom the environment, they will integrate themselves into a community and places where they are likely to meet children and will often assume a position of trust. Thanks to his game, renown, and fame, YandereDev has this built in. They are often described as charming, very helpful, and have insider status by their victims and people in their community. If all of this sounds familiar to you, then I hope you can use this information to inform your own conclusions. Finally, there are two aspects to grooming the child. The physical grooming, which we can rule out immediately as YandereDev and his victim have never met in person, as far as we know, and psychological grooming. Psychological grooming involves attempts to normalize sexualized behavior, interacting with the child on their own wavelength, or raising the child's status to that of an adult. The article also mentions that there are three typologies of groomer. The aggressive groomer, whose approach uses violence, threat, or force. The criminal opportunist, who engage in one-off offenses against strangers. And the intimate groomer, who perceives a relationship with their victims as analogous to a consenting sexual relationship between two adults. I'll let you decide which one is relevant to us. So then, how does this lead to alleged victims like Jane behaving the way that they do? According to Alvarez and Alessi in 2012, victims of sexual abuse are more likely to develop Stockholm Syndrome. Quote, "Their hostage situation exists in both material and subliminal form, manifested in their perceived threat to survival and belief the abuser is willing to carry out that threat, the victim's perception of some small kindness from the abuser within a context of terror, fear of isolation, and the perceived inability to escape." Basically, what this means is that abusers will try to confuse victims' perceptions of their abusers. Like, yes, they harmed me, they've threatened me, but they're also really thoughtful and attentive to me, and they give me little gifts, so I guess it's okay. And it creates this echo chamber because the abuser will also actively isolate them and make them feel like they have nowhere else to go. And without any outside feedback, the victims just come to follow the narratives created by their abusers. As written in the article, victim survivors said they blamed themselves. They felt guilty. They're ashamed, and this alone served to isolate them from the perspectives of others. This situation is made worse by threats abusers make to children as they silence them, and which renders them incapable of escape. They reframe the situation where they do not see themselves as abused when they actually are, or they minimize and rationalize the abuse. For example, saying things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "the abuser couldn't help themselves." Often victims blame themselves or see the abuser as good and themselves as bad, or they switch back and forth. They become convinced that the abuser will know if they have been disloyal and will get them, or that they will retaliate in some way. They feel they are to blame. They are bound to the abuser through secrecy, or they think the abuser is the only one who understands them, or they feel that the abuser treats them like a grown-up and in some cases want to protect the abuser. When these victims are children and they have no responsibility or obligation to protect a grown adult who has hurt them. But many victims will develop this cognitive distortion that creates a sense of false agency. Basically, the abusers will make the victims feel as though they're in control and making informed decisions when they're really not. Every decision they made in some way has been influenced by their abuser. But because of this belief that they're in control, the victims can't see that the relationship is abusive, even if they might know on some level that it is wrong. I know that for some of you who have experienced grooming before, these descriptions may hit home for you. But to summarize, Jane, if you're watching, I just want to say that it's not your fault. None of what happened was your fault, and none of what's happening to YandereDev now is your fault. The person who should know better between the two of you decided to exploit their power, and you are not responsible for his actions and his decisions. No matter what the context was, nothing will change the fact that he, a 35-year-old man, was sitting in private calls with a 16-year-old, calling them cute, sexy, and hot, talking about male genitalia sizes and breast sizes, asking said minor if they take his first time, and then trying to justify underage attraction as being the fault of Mother Nature and biology. This is the man who has publicly claimed that they want a S license so that underage kids could legally have relations with grown adults, and whose type is youthful, babyish, feminine, innocent, naive, childlike, pure, uncomplicated, unsophisticated, trusting, charming, polite, pleasant, sweet, lovable, cute, and malleable. If that doesn't sound like a child to you, then I don't know. I'm going to eat my shoe. He goes on to say that this is just a Japanese trope called moe. But here's the thing, I'm familiar with moe, and when I see a moe character, all I think about is that is a child. It's cute and all, but also keep it away from me, and I want to punt it into the sun. Because do you really need to act so cutesy if you are naturally cute? Stop trying so hard. YandereDev has trash taste, but are we really that surprised? No, because this is a publicly known pattern of behavior that no context in the world will make acceptable. And unfortunately, this isn't even the worst part, because if the Snapchat account truly did belong to YandereDev, and I do personally think that it does, then not only had he explicitly tried to pressure the victim into doing what he says by making them think that the fate of his livelihood and well-being rests on them, a child, when he had already destroyed it by engaging with the child in the first place, he convinced the victim that they are the abuser, and he had also solicited inappropriate pictures from the victim and is in possession of cheese pizza, plain and simple. He did this to himself, and every statement he had made or had approval of only serves to damn him further. This was not a one-time instance. This was several instances over the course of the summer and several months after. If this was a mistake, he would have needed to repeat that mistake over and over, despite even admitting several times in the calls that he is aware that what he is doing is a mistake, yet continues to do so anyway. He only stopped because he got exposed, not because he's sorry. People will tell you exactly what they are. And if YandereDev has to ask you, Jane, over and over again in these calls if you think he's a bad guy, it's because he knows he's a bad guy. I just abhor how they're trying to discredit Jane by painting them out as some mentally troubled individual that acted out for attention. And to me at least, All this tells me is that the people in YandereDev's circle and YandereDev himself acknowledges that Jane was in fact a vulnerable child who was and is a prime target for grooming, yet they decide to villainize Jane while painting YandereDev out as the victim. And if you are doing the same thing by blaming Jane for being in that situation or for what happened, then I hope that you are not also accepting advances from minors just because, oh, that's just how kids act these days. Jane, if you're watching this, I hope you'll realize one day that Alex Mahan only ever thought of himself. He never cared about you, what he did to you, or what he's doing to you even now. And that much is clear from his WordPress apology. So let's talk about that. For most of you who don't know, there are actually two versions of YandereDev's apology. One posted publicly on his WordPress here, which takes more of a PR route, but is no less dismissive of what he did, and one that was perhaps a bit more honest about how he really feels. So I'd like to compare these statements with each other, as well as the corresponding voice calls, which I consider the hard evidence that we know for a fact happened. First things first though, I just want to say that this apology is utter garbage. It completely dismisses the notion of grooming, is blatantly false, and worst of all, does not even address the victim and what he did to them at all. Both versions of the statement are the quintessential me. But I would not expect any less from our beloved YandereDev. The flow of both apologies are pretty much identical, though there are details that are different or absent in the WordPress apology that he did mention in his Discord apology. So I think putting them together will help create a complete picture. In the WordPress, YandereDev mentions that it had been a few months since a quote, fan of the game DM'd him to chat, whereas in his Discord apology, YandereDev says it was only a few weeks ago. In the screenshot, he also shows a thumbnail of a YouTube video with the words, "New allegations and evidence." I'm assuming this was a 3-hour-long video that Ali Mexi was supposed to post, but then dropped because YandereDev caught wind of it and talked the victim from letting it be publicized. I have no idea when this screenshot was taken, so if anyone could tell me, please leave a comment down below. However, this has a few implications. Either YandereDev is lying about the timeline of events, or the people in his server have been aware of his actions for much longer than the public and did nothing, hoping that it would simply get buried. I am, of course, hoping for the first option because I just don't want to think that all the people that walked out were okay with this kind of behavior until it reflected onto them personally. I'm also inclined to believe the former because in the same paragraph, he contradicts himself by saying how after 2 months, they agreed to voice chat. You can't say you know someone for only a few weeks but then wait 2 months for a voice chat. This is fixed up in his WordPress apology where he states that it was a few months back when Jane first DM'd him. The next paragraph is pretty much the same thing, him admitting that he knew from the start that Jane was 16 and a minor, yet proceeded to talk to them because they seemed funny and interesting, and he didn't see that as a problem. He rationalized it to himself, pretty much admitting to self-grooming, which is the first type of sexual grooming we discussed before. What his WordPress apology leaves out, however, is how Jane reminded him of an old friend. I hope this old friend is not another minor, but knowing YandereDev's track record and public admittance to not knowing anyone his own age, I highly doubt it, and that's my personal opinion, though I guess it is alluded in Ali's video that YandereDev has done this to multiple people that have just not spoken out on it. But that's probably why he left it out of the WordPress. Another difference between the Discord apology and the WordPress is that he addresses things more specifically in the Discord apology, whereas he's quite nebulous and vague about his actions on the WordPress, simply glossing it over as simple, quote, inappropriate/questionable remarks. Here's what he did mention in his Discord apology. His OnlyFans comment, which we hear him in the voice calls asking if Jane would start an OnlyFans. YandereDev explains this as them mentioning that the people who go to their school know what OnlyFans is, and he thought to himself, oh no, is the current girls completely ignoring school because they are planning to rich from OnlyFans? According to him, he asked them a very blunt question like, are you going to make an OnlyFans? And goes on to say that if you hear just that question and you know nothing else about the conversation, you could interpret it as him encouraging a minor to enter a career in corn when they grow up. But of course, that was not his intention. The only reason he asked that question was because he was trying to learn more about what the current generation of kids is being exposed to and what kind of life choices they're making. Like he himself isn't actively part of the problem, considering the content he's pushing to kids. So don't go and give me that BS, YandereDev. We all know you don't give a damn. But in reality, that's not even what the context of that conversation was. If you watched the video Ali did release, you would know that the context of that conversation is that YandereDev was talking about how he has to keep working on his game or else people won't support him and he'll lose his income. So Jane asks, why not try something else? Like OnlyFans. And then after a few self-deprecating comments, because that's the kind of pathetic loser he is, YandereDev goes, are you going to start an OnlyFans? How can you recommend someone to start an OnlyFans if you wouldn't be able to do it yourself? In a very defensive manner, because this man has the most fragile ego known to man. So clearly, he doesn't even remember this conversation and was pulling that, oh, I'm just concerned for this generation excuse out of his ass. In his statement, he also claims that he spoke to Jane while on autopilot and that they would fish for compliments and he was only telling them what they wanted to hear. When they have actively said in the voice calls that he would keep calling them cute to the point that they pointed it out, and he admits that he will keep doing it anyway. Sure, sounds like they were totally fishing for compliments and you weren't just love bombing them. Another thing that really bothers me is how he would paint it as Jane initiating all flirty or quote inappropriate interactions and how he would righteously shut it down and refuse to reciprocate. In his Discord apology, he claimed that he was simply trying to turn them down, and in the WordPress, he claims that he simply let them talk that way without stopping them, insinuating that he never even reciprocated in the first place. But in these calls and chat logs, we know that he was actively reciprocating and showing equal interest to the point that Jane had considered him their boyfriend, which he never denied, by the way. So this is 100% just a bold-faced lie. He tries to acknowledge how wrong these interactions were in the first place with the assertion that he never perceived it as anything but platonic in nature, you know, like the article suggested groomers do. While in every single chat log, we see how aware he is of the inappropriate nature of these interactions and how he's actively trying to hide himself from being caught. So the statement that moments were only weird in isolation or that his intentions are pure is pure BS when we see him say things like this. Is that the kind of vulgar joke you make to one of the guys, as you claim, YandereDev? Are you asking the homies for material to crank one out to? And here is just when things get hilarious to me. Because YandereDev then proceeds to say that it's all just a joke. And that's why they've been recording, because as Jane themselves have said on Cameron's livestream, he just says the most clippable things. But their friends gaslit them into thinking I was actually interested in them. Ew! That is the kind of logical reach that is so characteristically Alex Mahan. It's what makes Yansim so logically incoherent because you need to go through a 5-step verification process to get from point A to point B. You just can't find it anywhere else. And the funniest thing about this? He even goes so far as to claim that he had been the one manipulated into thinking that he could possibly do something like this. Why, he would never. Guys, he's just a sad, lonely game developer that's being manipulated and abused and traumatized by a 16-year-old. He didn't do anything wrong. He's the victim here. I made a joke with Mally on the live stream that the reason YandereDev donated to Rain was because he felt that he was the victim in the situation, but it's very much looking like it's actually true. He also claims that the reason the game's volunteers walked away from the project was because of public harassment, when literally everyone who has made a public statement just outright contradicts this. They all left because of you, Alex. Not because the public bullied them. But I think the worst part about both statements, Discord or WordPress, is that it completely disregards the distress, suffering, and exploitation inflicted upon the victim. Never once does Alex ever apologize to Jane, the person he did this to. Never once did he acknowledge their pain or their distress or how messed up this is for them. And for this, I'd like to refer back to the Snapchat logs of the moment YandereDev convinced his victim to stop the video Ali was going to release. In these logs, we see how Alex is talking about how this is the worst experience of his life, how this would ruin him, how this is so messed up for him, how despite Jane being the victim in this situation, they were the one repeatedly apologizing to their abuser. And I find it heartbreaking because we also see that at some point, Jane had seen through his manipulation and realized the situation they were in, but ultimately fell back to Alex's control. And then we see firsthand how Alex would have influenced the release of Jane's statements. Because as I've said at the start, the turn of phrases used in the apology and victim statements are verbatim to the phrases YandereDev tells Jane to say in the Snapchat messages, and that is why I have such a strong belief that this account truly belonged to him. But once again, for the people who know YandereDev and his true slimy worm nature, none of us are surprised. YandereDev has always been this way. He has never changed and he never will change. He refuses to seek help for his issues from fear that it will take time away from developing his game, and instead doesn't develop his game in favor of streaming pervy games that have been banned in every country except Japan, or games based on Columbine. He has hurt so many people before, and he will continue to hurt people. And if you continue to protect him, then you are no better than what he is for condoning the things that he has done and turning a blind eye to it. Also, nobody aside from his child fans give a damn about his stupid game, okay? This is not about the game. I genuinely have no faith in this man getting better. He's been this way throughout his entire lifespan on YouTube and 4chan, basically for as long as he's had access to the internet. And he has already claimed multiple times before that he's going to seek help and get better. And every single time, each promise had been a lie. So, I don't see why that will change now. As long as he still has a revenue stream, he will continue exactly as he is. Because why fix it if it ain't broke, right? All I can hope is that the people who look up to him, or God forbid, idolize him, will smarten up and get as far away as they can from this man. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in the pond for a while. This was a very difficult video for me to make. I hate having to talk about or look into what this man did, or having to read his asinine statements. but I am determined to see this through. If there are any updates, I'll be sure to make another video. I just hope that this manages to change some people's minds. I want to give a big shout out to my pond dwellers on Patreon for supporting me and my channel. I usually do art, so if you want to see more of my art, then follow me on all my social media. If you want to see something I'm actually passionate about, check out my Wild Words series here on YouTube, because that will make me really happy. All the links are in the description, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye!